Hello and welcome to a new series that I'll be doing kind of intermittently. It's called Confessions of an RPG Maker User, and this will be a series about explaining my adventures, misadventures, the highs and lows of my time using RPG Maker, which I still use to this day. Today's episode, which will be the first episode, will be about my rant that I had made on RPG Maker Web. This rant that I posted on the RPG Maker web forums was made because I was frustrated and angry over my experience of using RPG Maker MZ and my experiences in dealing with the whole Vizu Stella thing. Now, for those who don't know, RPG Maker, or the guys that make RPG Maker, Katakoa, even though they're the publisher, not the programmer, but who really cares? They're the business people, and that's all that matters. They released a new version of RPG Maker MZ. Now, I'll be doing an episode. In fact, the second episode I'm planning to be about my experience with MZ, even though it's kind of a short one. But today we'll be discussing the rant that I'd written, and when I had made that rant, I was upset with the Visit Stella team, and I was upset with the whole RPG Maker MZ thing because I'm not used, because I've been frustrated because, one, I was discovering the limitations of MZ. Now, one of the things I felt that MZ should have done is be a replacement for RPG Maker MV, but because things like enemy graphics and music and how limited they are, I feel like the assets you have to import from MV to get the most out of MZ, which I feel is kind of stupid, and I didn't really like that very much. The Vizu Stella thing, so Vizu Stella is the name brand for Yanfly and a bunch of other people's plugins, where therefore these plugins are for RPG Maker MZ. They have this package where you can get all the plugins for free, except all the plugins are part of like this pre-existing game project thing that demonstrates the plugins and what they do, which I feel is kind of pointless, because if you're getting the plugins, then you know what the plugins can do. There is documentation, or if you're like me who've previously used Yanfly plugins, you have experience using these plugins and hoping to God they didn't do anything major to their use, even though the nice thing about a lot of the Vizustella plugins is that they bundled a lot of previous plugins into one, like having side view battler graphics as enemy graphics. That has been integrated into the battle core system. The main menu manager is a lot easier to deal with since you're not fuddling through large piles of stuff. What really pissed me off was the Quest Journal plugin, and I was really upset about it because, one, I had to pay $10 for it, and I figured, it's going to be useful. I'll get the $10 out of it. That, and I understand why a lot of the Vizustella plugins you have to pay for, because a lot of these people need food, they need housing, they have expenses, and they can't be making plugins for free all day if they can't really support themselves, which I'm all for. It's just that the reality is that a lot of these people that use these plugins aren't really professional game development people, because that's just how RPG Maker works, where a lot of the people that actually use it and make games with it are hobbyists that make, little fan games or little unique experiences. The people that professionally use RPG Maker tend to either make their own plugins. They usually have their own assets, so they're not using the RTP. They're usually self-sufficient to the point where they wouldn't need a lot of this outside stuff unless they had money to burn, but not enough for, say, a programmer. So I guess that's where the niche where Vizustella falls in, but that's a topic for later. Going into the rant, the reason I posted the rant on RPG Maker Web is that I was frustrated with MV, I was frustrated with Vizustella, but I didn't really have an outlet for this kind of stuff because none of my friends or family whom I vent to on a regular basis or irregular and they wouldn't know a thing about RPG Maker. In fact, they wouldn't know who Yanflay is. They wouldn't know what MV is and what MV does and doesn't do, what graphics are included with the enemies in MZ that MZ has but MV doesn't, but has all the stuff that what MV has but MZ doesn't. So I figured I'd post this really toxic thing on RPG Maker Web, because that's where a lot of the people that know RPG Maker is, because obviously that's a forum where RPG Maker users go to. And I wrote the thing, and then I went to bed, and when I woke up the next morning, the responses were really intense, or rather mixed, because a lot of people agreed with me about the whole Vizustella thing. A lot of people agreed with me about the RPG Maker MZ experience being something that was a little bit disappointing. But then there's a lot of people that said, oh, you're being toxic, and this is why I hate the community. So the reason that I made the toxic post was because I didn't realize the community itself was toxic, because I never used that forum account. As you can tell, if you go on my RPG Maker web account, you can see that I made that account years ago, but only made a handful of posts. Compare that to my Sorter Island fan site, the Sorter Island forums, where I've made hundreds of posts and use more regularly than the RPG Maker one. But that's neither here or there. What is here or there is that I made this really ranty post, and there was a really mixed reception to it. And it got to the point where a lot of people were ripping on Yanflay, and Yanflay had to go out and made several posts on my thread about explaining why everything is the way they is. And I agree with the fact that, you can't do shit for free and expect, to pay the bills and stuff. That, and especially to pay for such high quality when he can just make JavaScript stuff for a company and be able to support himself that way, which I completely understand. But that doesn't mean that I feel like my feelings were invalid, but whatever. I later apologized, and I'm still apologizing for the thread, and mostly because, one, I should have just found somebody just to complain to and just had a clear mind before airing off my grievances. Because that's essentially what that thread is, just me airing my grievances in a rather violent fashion. Another thing that I noticed is that there was an update to the Quest Journal plugin for the Vizustella stuff, and it added some of the things that I complained about, like having to need to update the quest tracker every time a quest objective changes, or if you add a quest, it has to automatically be changed, and yada, yada, yada. And that, and another odd quirk about the quest journal is that it's not very self-explanatory to use. In fact, there's a tutorial on how to use it, but in order to see the actual tutorial, you have to put the plugin in, after you put in the prerequisite plugins that make it actually work, and then boot up the game in playtest mode, and then look at the side quests, and then read the description of the side quests and see how the thing does it. However, I didn't realize this until after I figured out how to use it by myself, and what really frustrated me is that it wasn't super clear on how to use it and how to make quests. However, through experimentation, I later learned how to do the quests, and the plugin itself is of high quality and is very useful. But the thing that I didn't really like the most was because I was used to this other plugin called the Game's Quest System, and it came with an executable file that allows me to essentially mass produce a lot of side quests. And the reason why I was able to make an RPG Maker game, Tales of Yore, which is available in Game Jolt for $20, and the reason I managed to fit that game with 67 side quests is because the Game's Quest System allowed me to essentially make quests in large batches and be able to bang a large amount of them really quickly in RPG Maker, allowing for a more efficient content adding experience. But with the Vizustella one, because everything is done through a series of menus within the plugin manager itself, I couldn't really mass produce the plugins that, mass produce the side quests in a fashion that I was used to. In fact, I end up really slowing me down. And while I was remaking The Legend of Zune, which is now on hold because of problems, I could only make quests in smaller batches because it would be highly inefficient to make like 10 quests in a row and then add them all together. And in the Legend of Zune remake, there was a heavier focus on fetch quests because fetch quests are in and of themselves easy to make, and even with the game's quest system are really easy to make. But I had to rely on fetch quests a lot more often because the quest journal didn't make it so that way I could do other kinds of quests super efficiently and super quickly. But that's neither here or there. Yanfly, I think, added some stuff and updated it, which feels very bittersweet because I feel like my rant was responsible for him having to respond twice to my thread and then had to make some fixes to the quest journal, which, fixes are nice, but I feel bad that I feel like that I had influenced him to do it, and it does make me feel really bad, and I do apologize to Yanfly about how everything was with that rant, but, that's in the past, and I can't really do much about it except hope for some admin to delete it or lock the thread, which I hope happens in the sometime future. That concludes my first episode of RPG Maker Confessions of an RPG Maker User. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.